Deion Sanders just went on national television and issued a warning so direct, so threatening, and so unprecedented that it's forcing the entire NFL to confront whether fathers of top draft prospects have too much power over where their sons end up playing. Deion didn't mince words or hide behind corporate speak. He looked directly at the camera during a live interview and said, "If the Cleveland Browns draft my son Shedeur with their pick and they think they're going to put him in that toxic environment with that dysfunctional ownership and that destroyed locker room, I will advise him not to sign. We will sit out the entire season if necessary. We will re-enter the draft next year. The Browns are not an option for Deion Sanders, period." The host, stunned by the bluntness, asked if Deion understands that players can't just refuse to sign with teams that draft them. Deion's response was chilling. "Watch me." And here's what makes this warning so explosive. Deion isn't bluffing. He's already been meeting with lawyers and agents who've helped other players navigate draft leverage situations. He's got a financial plan that would allow Shedeur to sit out a year without going broke, and he's apparently received encouragement from other NFL players and even some coaches who privately support the idea of prospects having more control over which dysfunctional organizations they're forced to join. This isn't just Deion being Deion. This is a calculated threat backed by real preparation that could fundamentally change how the draft works if he actually follows through. The interview happened on Monday morning, February 23, 2026, during a segment on a major sports network's daily talk show. Deion Sanders was scheduled to appear as part of the show's coverage of draft prospects and the upcoming combine, and the producers had planned what they thought would be a standard conversation about Shedeur's development, his strengths and weaknesses as a prospect, and Deion's advice to teams evaluating quarterback talent. But then one of the hosts asked a question that triggered what came next. The host said, "Deion, there's been a lot of speculation about where Shedeur might land in the draft. The Cleveland Browns are picking third overall after that big trade they made. Would Shedeur be excited about potentially going to Cleveland and being part of what they're trying to build there?" And that's when, according to sources, Deion's entire demeanor changed from conversational to deadly serious. Deion leaned forward, looked directly at the camera, and said, "Let me be very clear about something, because I don't want there to be any confusion or any surprises on draft day. The Cleveland Browns are not an option for Deion Sanders." The hosts, caught off guard, asked what he meant by that, and Deion, according to sources who were watching the control room monitors, didn't hesitate or soften his message. "I mean exactly what I said. Cleveland is a dysfunctional organization with toxic ownership, with a history of destroying young quarterbacks, with a locker room that's falling apart, and with stadium drama and player revolts happening right now as we speak. I would not in good conscience allow my son to walk into that situation and have his career destroyed before it starts. So if Cleveland drafts Shedeur, I will advise him not to sign the contract. We will sit out. We will re-enter the draft next year. That is not negotiable." The studio went silent for several seconds, according to sources. The hosts exchanged glances, unsure whether to challenge Deion on the feasibility of what he was proposing or to move on to another topic. Finally, one host said, "Deion, you know the rules. Players who get drafted can't just refuse to sign and re-enter the draft the next year. That's not how it works." And Deion's response, according to sources, was delivered with a confidence that made it clear this wasn't an empty threat made in the heat of the moment. "Actually, it is how it works if you're willing to sit out a year," Deion said. "There's precedent. It's rare, but it's happened. And more importantly, there's nothing the NFL can do to force a player to sign a contract if that player chooses not to. They can keep his rights, they can prevent him from signing with another team that year, but they cannot make him sign. And if sitting out 1 year means protecting my son from a situation that would damage his career long term, then that's what we'll do." What Deion was referencing, and what sources say he's been researching extensively with legal help, is the NFL's draft rules regarding unsigned draft picks. According to league rules, if a player drafted in the first round does not sign with the team that drafted him by a certain deadline, that team retains his rights for 1 year. During that year, the player cannot sign with any other NFL team. But after that year expires without a signed contract, the player becomes eligible to re-enter the following year's draft. It's an obscure rule that's almost never invoked because the financial incentive for first-round picks to sign their rookie deals is enormous, and because most players don't have the resources or willingness to sit out an entire year of their career. But according to sources familiar with Deion's planning, he's been working with financial advisors to create a structure where Shedeur could sit out a year without significant financial hardship, relying on endorsement income, investments, and potentially even a loan structure that would allow him to survive financially while waiting to re-enter the draft in a better situation. The hosts, still struggling to process what they were hearing, asked Deion if he understood the risk he was taking by making such a public ultimatum. "What if Cleveland drafts Shedeur anyway and calls your bluff?" one host asked. Deion's answer, according to sources, was the moment that made it clear this was real and not just posturing. Then they waste their third overall pick on a player who won't sign with them, and we sit out a year, and Shedeur gets drafted by a competent organization in 2027. Cleveland's the one with more to lose in that scenario, not us. They need a quarterback desperately. I don't need my son in Cleveland. The other hosts tried a different angle. "Deion, you're essentially telling an NFL team not to draft your son. Don't you think that might make other teams nervous about drafting him too, worried that you'll interfere or make demands?" And Deion responded, "I'm not telling teams not to draft Shedeur. I'm telling one specific team not to waste their pick because we will not sign there. Other teams, good organizations with good leadership and good cultures, they should absolutely draft Shedeur because he'll sign with them and help them win championships. This is specific to Cleveland." The interview continued for a few more minutes, but the damage, or the impact, depending on your perspective, was done. Within minutes of Deion's statement, social media exploded with reactions. The clip of Deion saying Cleveland is not an option went viral immediately. NFL insiders started debating whether Deion actually has the leverage to pull this off or whether it's a bluff that will backfire. And the Cleveland Browns, according to sources, went into full crisis mode, trying to figure out how to respond to being publicly rejected by the prospect they've been planning their entire offseason around. The legal and practical feasibility of what Deion is proposing has been analyzed extensively by sports attorneys and cap experts over the past 24 hours. According to these experts, Deion is technically correct that a drafted player can refuse to sign and sit out a year, and that after that year the player re-enters the draft. But these experts also point out multiple complications that make this strategy extremely risky. First, there's no guarantee that Shedeur would get drafted higher or into a better situation in the 2027 draft. He could actually fall if teams view him as damaged goods after the Cleveland situation. Second, sitting out a year means missing a year of development and NFL experience that could hurt Shedeur's long-term career trajectory. Third, the financial model Deion is relying on assumes that endorsement deals and other income sources would remain stable during a year where Shedeur isn't playing football, and that's not guaranteed. And fourth, pulling off this strategy would make Shedeur and Deion extremely unpopular with NFL owners and executives, potentially creating long-term professional consequences. But despite these risks, sources who've spoken with Deion say he's completely serious about following through if Cleveland drafts Shedeur. According to these sources, Deion has already had conversations with financial backers who would be willing to support Shedeur during a sit-out year. He's had preliminary discussions with agents about how to structure Shedeur's eventual contract with whatever team drafts him in 2027. And he's apparently received private encouragement from current NFL players who believe prospects should have more power to avoid dysfunctional organizations, and who view Deion's threatened action as potentially beneficial to all players if it forces the league to address organizational accountability.
The Cleveland Browns' reaction to Deion's warning has been carefully measured in public, but reportedly panicked in private. The team issued a brief statement saying, "We respect all draft-eligible prospects and their families. Our focus is on evaluating talent and building the best possible roster for Browns fans. We won't comment on speculation about specific players or draft scenarios." But according to sources inside the organization, the Browns are deeply concerned that Deion's public ultimatum might actually force them to pass on Shedeur, even if they believe he's the best player available, because drafting him would create an impossible situation where they either cave to Deion's demands and look weak, or they try to force Shedeur to sign and end up in a year-long standoff that wastes their most valuable draft asset.
Jimmy Haslam, the Browns owner, is reportedly furious about being publicly called out as toxic and dysfunctional, even though everything Deion said about the organization's recent chaos is factually accurate. According to sources, Haslam has told people in the Browns organization that he's tempted to draft Shedeur anyway, just to call Deion's bluff and prove that players can't dictate where they go. But cooler heads in the organization, according to sources, are warning Haslam that turning the third overall pick into an ego battle with Deion Sanders would be catastrophic if Shedeur actually refuses to sign, leaving Cleveland without a quarterback and without the draft pick they traded significant assets to acquire. Other NFL teams are watching this situation with intense interest because the implications go far beyond just Cleveland and Shedeur. If Deion successfully prevents his son from being drafted by a team he doesn't approve of, it could encourage other parents and agents to try similar tactics. Some team executives, according to sources, are discussing whether the league needs to create new rules that would prevent players or their representatives from publicly discouraging teams from drafting them. But others, according to sources, are arguing that players and their families should have some ability to protect themselves from truly dysfunctional organizations, and that if the Browns are such a toxic situation that prospects are refusing to go there, maybe the problem is the Browns and not Deion's response to it. The NFL league office has not commented publicly on Deion's warning, but according to sources, league officials are reviewing the situation to determine if any league rules or policies are being violated. The league has tampering rules that prevent teams from having improper contact with draft prospects, but there's no clear rule preventing a prospect's father from publicly stating which team he doesn't want his son to play for. According to sources, the league's preliminary assessment is that while Deion's statement is unprecedented and problematic for the integrity of the draft process, it doesn't technically violate any existing rules, and therefore the league has limited ability to intervene. As of now, Monday, February 23, 2026, the situation remains fluid and uncertain. The draft is still 2 months away in late April. The Browns have time to evaluate their options and decide whether to risk drafting Shedeur despite Deion's warning, or whether to pivot to another quarterback prospect. Deion has time to either double down on his threat or potentially walk it back if circumstances change, and the NFL has time to consider whether new policies are needed to prevent similar situations in the future. But one thing is certain, Deion Sanders just fundamentally changed the conversation about the 2026 draft and about the Cleveland Browns' future, and the ripple effects of his warning will be felt throughout the league regardless of how this specific situation resolves. Deion Sanders publicly warned the Browns not to draft Shedeur, threatening to sit out a year and re-enter the 2027 draft if Cleveland doesn't back off. The warning is backed by legal research, financial planning, and genuine willingness to follow through. Cleveland now faces an impossible choice: draft Shedeur and risk a year-long standoff, or pass on their top target because a prospect's father said no. The draft's integrity and the Browns' future both hang in the balance.